She's not on the list. Please leave this area. My daughter-in-law said that to my wife. Right at the foot of the private jet we bought with our own hands 30 years ago. Seattle was cold and rainy. The pilot was waiting. The live stream camera was already on. And my son said nothing. I built an entire transportation empire from nothing but my bare hands. Yet, that morning I stood there watching the woman who sold all her jewelry to buy our very first airplane, being denied the right to step into the sky that belonged to her. Have you ever seen a lifetime of effort erased by a single sentence? Before I continue with what happened that morning, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, which city, which state. I've always believed that a family story never belongs to just one person. It belongs to all of us. And now, let me tell you what happened right after those words were spoken. I didn't answer that question right away. I just stood there, listening to the rain tapping steadily against the glass walls of the private terminal. At 72, I've learned when silence is necessary. But that silence that morning wasn't weakness. It was me measuring my breath so I wouldn't say something that could never be taken back. Ivy kept her hand held out in front of her as if stopping a stranger. She was wearing an expensive white coat. Her hair was perfectly styled for the live stream she had been promoting all week. The flight to Aspen, as she put it, was to celebrate Owen's new success and reposition the company's image in the public eye. Image. I looked at the jet parked on the runway. The tail number was Amy's birthday. She was the one who chose it. I still remember the night the two of us sat at the kitchen table counting every number when we decided to buy it under our personal name instead of the company's. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a reward for 30 years of work without a single day off. And now, it was being used as a backdrop for a live stream. Mom, I already told you. Ivy continued, her voice calm like she was explaining an internal rule. The passenger list is final. This flight is for people who actually contribute to the company's image. I bought you a commercial ticket at the other terminal. If you leave now, you'll still make it. Not a hint of hesitation. I turned to Owen. I had hoped, even for one simple sentence. Ivy, that's enough. But he only adjusted his tie, glanced at his watch, and said quietly, just listen to Ivy, Mom. She's handling everything. Handling everything. I looked at my wife's face. Amy didn't react the way I expected. No anger, no argument. She just stood straight, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes drifting over the body of the plane, like she was looking at an old memory. I understood that look. It was the look of someone who once slept on the floor of a cold storage warehouse in the winter of 1988 to save on fuel costs. The look of someone who sold her mother's wedding ring to put down a deposit on our first cargo plane. Back then, we didn't have a private terminal. No VIP lounge. Just a rented office and a loan everyone told us not to sign. Ivy didn't know those things. Maybe Owen had forgotten them too. Dad, Owen said, turning to me, this is just an image strategy. We need to look young and dynamic. Mom isn't used to this kind of thing. I felt something inside me go hollow. Strategy. I remembered very clearly last year when I signed the papers, transferring executive control to Owen. I thought it was the right time. I was 71. I wanted to step back, spend more time with Amy. Those documents gave him management authority, but ownership of the shares stayed with us. I believed that line was clear enough. Maybe Ivy read the fine print more carefully than I did. Mom needs to understand us, Ivy added, her voice tightening slightly as the camera waited. The company needs a new image now, not the past. The past. That word stayed in my head longer than the sound of the rain outside. Amy turned to me. She gave a very small smile. Not a happy one. The kind of smile someone wears when they've seen enough to no longer be surprised. Jeff, she said softly, just for me to hear, do you remember the day we signed the papers to buy this plane? I nodded. You told me to keep everything very clear on paper. I didn't answer, but in my mind, numbers and clauses began to surface. Ivy thought management meant total control. She wasn't completely wrong, but she missed one thing. Final ownership didn't belong to her. And it didn't fully belong to Owen either. A ground crew member walked over, looking uneasy. He glanced at Ivy, then at Amy, then at me. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. They didn't know who they were supposed to listen to. Ivy raised her phone and whispered to someone about departure time and the live stream schedule. She didn't look back at Amy again, as if the decision were already settled. But Amy didn't move. She took one slow step toward the plane, not to board it, just to stand closer, close enough that I saw her fingers lightly touch the cold paint beneath the rain. That's when I understood something. The most painful part wasn't being stopped. It was being treated like you had never existed at all. I looked at my watch. 10 minutes until takeoff. And in those 10 minutes, some things were going to change. That span of time was enough for a plane to leave the ground, and it was also enough for a man to look back on his entire life. I stood beside Amy watching the rain slide down the side of the jet. Her hand was still resting on the cold paint. I knew she wasn't touching metal. She was touching the years we had bet everything on. I thought back to the winter of 1988. Back then, there was no private lounge, no press, no one talking about brand image. We had an old pickup truck and a warehouse lease that still smelled like fresh ink. Amy was the first to suggest buying a small cargo plane the bank was trying to repossess. I hesitated. The down payment was more than we could afford. That night, she opened an old wooden box and took out every piece of jewelry her mother had left her. "I don't need these," she said, "but I need you to believe that we can fly." I never forgot those words. We sold everything that could be sold. Amy personally tracked every expense, every gallon of fuel. Some nights she slept on the warehouse floor just to avoid paying for a hotel. I still remember the cold, fluorescent lights on her face as she worked through the numbers. No complaints. Not once. People see photos of private jets today and think they're symbols of excess. But to me, this one was the result of thousands of small decisions and hundreds of moments when quitting felt easier. The jet in front of me wasn't the first one we owned, but it was the first we bought entirely with saved money. No loans. More importantly, it was registered under Amy's personal name. When I signed over executive control to Owen last year, I read every line carefully. I gave him authority over operations, the right to represent the company, the power to sign contracts within an approved budget. I thought that was enough to help him grow. What I didn't anticipate was this. When power is handed over too early, people start confusing management with ownership. Ivy was the first to propose restructuring the image. She wanted the jet to appear more on social media, to tie it to the company's new lifestyle narrative. I stayed quiet and watched. I told myself that if it moved the company forward without damaging its core values, I could live with it. Maybe that silence made her believe we had fully stepped aside. "Jeff," Amy said softly, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Do you still have a copy of the original contract?" I nodded. "I always keep it. A habit from someone who has stood too close to losing everything. That contract clearly states the jet belongs to Amy personally. The company only has usage rights under an internal lease, rights that can be terminated at any time if the terms are violated." I looked toward Owen. He was talking with the ground crew about departure timing. There was no malice on his face, only the confidence of someone who believes he's doing the right thing. I wondered, when did he start seeing what we built as something automatic? 10 years ago, when the company survived its first major crisis, Owen called me every night for advice. He was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of disappointing us. I told him that mistakes were part of growing up, but I never taught him how to tell ambition apart from gratitude. The rain grew heavier. Ground staff hurried to cover equipment. Ivy stepped back to keep her shoes dry. She frowned when she saw Amy still standing there. "We're out of time," Ivy said, her voice low but firm. "If Mom isn't going to the other terminal, then please leave this area." I heard that sentence like a thin blade. Amy didn't respond right away. She simply withdrew her hand from the plane and gently wiped the rain from her fingers. Then she turned to me. There was no hurt in her eyes, only a sharp, steady clarity. "I think," she said slowly, "it's time to make a few things clear." I understood. Last year, when I transferred management authority, I also asked legal to review every personally owned asset leased internally. Not because I distrusted Owen. I just wanted transparency. As people grow older, they start thinking more about how things will be remembered. There was one clause Ivy likely never read closely. If a personal asset is used in a way that distorts brand values or harms the owner's reputation, the owner has the right to revoke usage immediately. Live streams, image, backdrop. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just checked my watch again. 8 minutes left. Amy walked slowly toward the VIP lounge. No rush, no looking back. I walked beside her. Behind us, I heard Ivy calling someone, her voice edged with uncertainty. Owen watched us go, and for the first time that morning he seemed to realize that his mother's silence wasn't acceptance. When the lounge door closed behind us, the rain outside faded. The quiet inside was so complete I could hear the wall clock ticking. Amy sat down, removed her gloves, and placed them on the table. "I let things go too far," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, we just let them believe the sky belonged to them." She looked at me calm and steady. Then she said it's time to remind them who built the wings. Outside, the engines were still being checked, but I already knew that flight was not going to take off the way they planned. Amy didn't say another word inside the lounge. She simply took out her phone and opened a message thread she had prepared the night before. I watched the screen glow in her hand. No extra emotion, just short, precise lines sent to her personal attorney and the chair of the board. I understood immediately. Amy wasn't acting on impulse. She had prepared before anyone realized something was about to change. "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. She looked at me. I was sure the moment they decided to turn our property into a prop. I didn't ask anything else. At this age, I know when a decision has already been weighed long enough. 3 minutes later, my phone vibrated. A message from the board chair. The emergency virtual meeting had concluded. With 60% of the shares held directly and indirectly by Amy through the family trust, the resolution to temporarily suspend Owen's executive authority had passed. The reason was stated clearly: use of assets tied to a major shareholder without consent, creating reputational risk. Legal language is always cold, but its effect is very clear. At the same time, Amy received confirmation from legal. The notice terminating the company's right to use the jet was now effective immediately. The aircraft reverted to personal use exactly as outlined in the signed agreement. I took a long breath. Outside, I heard hurried footsteps. The lounge door opened. Ivy walked in first. Owen followed. Ivy's face no longer held the confidence she had earlier. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "The pilot says he just received a notice from legal." Amy stood up and faced them. No raised voice, no accusations. "That's correct," she said. "I've withdrawn the company's right to use the aircraft." Ivy froze. "Withdrawn? But that plane belongs to the company." "A leased asset," Amy corrected calmly. "And the lease has been terminated." Owen looked at me, searching for another explanation. I didn't look away. "Dad, what is this?" "I think you understand the difference between managing something and owning it," I said slowly. "Maybe it's time to revisit that." The air in the room thickened. Through the glass, I saw Captain Miller walking down the aircraft stairs. He had worked with us for over 20 years. "Careful. By the book." Miller stopped at the lounge door, knocked lightly, then stepped inside. He removed his cap and nodded to Amy first. "Ma'am," he said, "clearly I've received official notice. Under aviation regulations and the ownership contract, only you now have authority to designate the passenger list." Ivy turned toward him, her voice slipping out of control. "We're ready for departure. Everything is scheduled. You can't stop this over a personal decision." Miller didn't change his expression. "I follow the instructions of the lawful owner." The lawful owner. I looked at Ivy. Maybe for the first time she realized that what she thought was authority had only ever been temporary permission. Owen took a step back. "Mom, you're making this bigger than it needs to be." Amy looked at her son for a long moment before answering. "No," she said. "I'm just making it clear." She reached into her bag and placed a thin stack of documents on the table. "This is the board's resolution suspending your executive authority," she said. "Effective 10 minutes ago." I saw Owen's hand tremble slightly as he took the papers. He scanned page after page, his lips pressed tight. Ivy shook her head. "This can't be real. This is a setup. We were just building a new image for the company." "Building an image," I repeated evenly. By pushing aside the people who laid the foundation, no one answered. Outside, the rain began to ease. The engines shut down completely. The steady noise disappeared, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Amy turned to Miller. "There will be no flight to Aspen today." "Yes, ma'am." Ivy stepped forward, as if she wanted to say more, then stopped. I could see calculations racing behind her eyes, searching for a way to regain control. "You can't do this in front of partners and media," she said. "This will damage the company's reputation." Amy looked straight at her. "Reputation isn't built on images online," she said. "It's built on respect." The sentence wasn't loud, but it ended the argument. Owen lifted his head from the documents. His eyes were no longer hard. Something close to confusion had taken their place. "Dad, Mom, Can we talk privately? I shook my head slightly. Everything that needs to be said has already been said. I didn't feel triumphant, only heavy. When you hand power to your child, you never imagine the day you might have to take it back. Amy walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, she paused for a moment. I'm not banning anyone from the plane, she said slowly. I'm just reminding you that the right to decide doesn't belong to those who've forgotten where it came from. Then she stepped out onto the runway. Miller stood straight, waiting for further instruction. I followed Amy. Behind us, I heard the soft rustle of paper in Owen's hands. The jet was still there, but the balance of power had shifted, and this was only the beginning. Amy didn't step onto the stairs. She stopped in the middle of the runway and looked around the rain-soaked airport. No one spoke. This silence was no longer awkward. It felt like the moment just before a door closes. I want to talk in the lounge, Amy said to Owen and Ivy. Not here. Her voice wasn't raised. No one argued. We turned back toward the VIP lounge. Airport staff quietly dismantled the setup for the flight. A few of Ivy's designer suitcases were still sitting near the aircraft stairs. I watched a ground crew member pull them aside, setting them down near a shallow puddle to clear the path. No one threw anything, but the way they were moved so quickly made them look out of place, alone on an empty runway. Inside the lounge, the door closed. No cameras, no partners, just family. Amy sat down across from Owen and Ivy. I stood behind her the way I had for years during board meetings. I've reviewed the last quarterly financial reports, Amy began. There are several expenses tied to the aircraft maintenance fund that I never received a clear explanation for. Ivy responded immediately. Those were brand investment costs. We approved them as part of the new strategy. Strategy doesn't include transferring money to a consulting firm with no operating history, Amy said evenly. That firm is registered under a proxy name, but the ultimate beneficiary is directly connected to you. The air in the room tightened. Owen turned to Ivy. You told me it was just an external marketing agency. Ivy held her composure. It is. And they did work. Amy opened a second folder. I requested an independent audit. They found no services matching the amount paid. I looked at Owen. The color drained from his face. Why didn't I know about this? He asked Ivy quietly. Because you trusted me, Ivy said at once. And I did it for the good of the company. I'd heard that phrase before. For the good of the company is the easiest thing to say when no one wants to admit whose good it really is. Amy placed a copy of the report on the table and slid it toward Owen. This amount won't collapse the company, she said. But it collapses trust. No one spoke for a long moment. I knew Amy wasn't looking for punishment. She was looking for acknowledgement. Owen read each page, slower and slower. His shoulders sank. You can explain, he said to Ivy. It sounded more like a plea than a question. Ivy looked straight at Amy. You've been watching us from the beginning. No, Amy replied. I just didn't close my eyes. I stepped forward slightly. When you accepted executive authority, we agreed that transparency was the first principle. You signed that. Owen nodded faintly. I know. Then why didn't you check, I asked. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said softly, I thought I needed to trust the person beside me. I looked at my son and realized the most painful part wasn't the money. It was how confidence and pride had blurred his sense of responsibility. Amy closed the folder. I won't take this outside, she said. No lawsuits, no noise. But starting today, all investments will be reviewed, and you will no longer have unilateral authority. Ivy clenched her hands. What do you want? I want the company to return to its real values, Amy said, not become a stage. Owen lifted his head. Mom, I was wrong. I didn't oversee things closely enough. It was the first admission I had heard from him all morning. Amy looked at him for a long time. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, only exhaustion. You chose to stand beside the person who blocked your mother, she said, and I respect that choice. But every choice has consequences. I saw Owen's lips tremble. He was no longer the confident CEO from the runway. He was just a middle-aged man realizing how far he had drifted from his roots. Amy took a check from her bag. The amount matched exactly the total sum transferred to that consulting firm. I don't need this money, she said, but I want you to understand its value. She looked at Ivy, then at Owen, and she tore the check in half. The sound of paper tearing was soft, but sharp in the quiet room. "This is the last amount you can consider unconditional support from me," she said. "From now on, everything comes with responsibility." It didn't feel like retaliation. It felt like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside the glass, the sky was beginning to brighten. The rain had stopped. Amy stood up. "We won't be flying to Aspen today." Ivy watched her anger mixed with helplessness. Owen stayed seated, his hands still resting on the folders. I followed Amy toward the door. Before leaving, I turned back to my son. "You can still fix this," I said slowly. "But first you need to understand what you've lost." The lounge door closed behind us. The jet was still waiting for instructions. But the journey ahead wouldn't be a celebration. It would be a return. Amy didn't say another word when we stepped back onto the runway. She simply signaled to Captain Miller. He walked over, stood straight, and waited for instructions. "Fly north," Amy said. "Montana." Miller looked surprised for a moment, but he didn't ask why. He just nodded. "Yes, ma'am." I looked at Amy. Aspen had been carefully prepared. Schedule set, congratulations ready to be posted. But we both understood this wasn't a day for celebration. It was a day to close a circle. The jet lifted off smoothly. No applause. No cameras. Just the steady, familiar sound of the engines. I looked out the window as Seattle slowly faded behind gray clouds. Amy sat quietly, her hands resting on her lap. Her face showed little emotion. But I knew her heart was calm. The calm of someone who has made a difficult but right decision. "Do you remember our first flight?" she asked softly. "I do," I said. "The plane shook so hard I thought it wouldn't make it up." Amy smiled faintly. But it flew. Montana greeted us with clearer skies. When we landed at the small airport where we worked in our early years, I saw a group waiting. They were representatives from an organ transport organization Amy had contacted in advance. No ceremony, just firm handshakes and sincere gratitude. Amy signed the documents, transferring ownership of the jet, not to the company, not to the family, but to an organization that would use it to deliver chances at life, to the right place at the right time. "I don't need it anymore," she told them, "but there are people who need it more than I do." I stood beside her, listening. I thought about Ivy, about Owen, about how easily people confuse value with image. Then I looked at the plane one last time. It had once been a symbol of our success. Now it had become part of something bigger. We left the airport in an old rental car. No one recognized us, and that felt good. The small house in the Montana town was still there. The wood was older. The roof needed a few repairs. But it stood firm, the way we always had. Amy made tea. I sat down in the familiar wooden chair. No expensive furniture. No phones buzzing nonstop. Just the smell of hot tea. And evening light through the window. "I don't regret it," Amy said, placing a cup in front of me. "Neither do I replied. "Even if it hurts." She nodded. "Hurt is normal. But staying silent and doing nothing, that's what I couldn't accept." That evening, Owen called me. I didn't rush to answer. When I finally picked up, he didn't speak right away. "Dad," he said at last, his voice low. "I'm sorry." I didn't scold him. I only said, "You need time to understand. Your mother and I need time too." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll fix it." "Good," I said. "But don't fix it to get back what you lost. Fix it to be worthy of what you still have." When the call ended, I set the phone down. Amy looked at me without asking. We sat there for a long time, not talking much, just listening to the wind outside the porch. At this age, I understand something clearly. A legacy isn't what you leave your children. It's what you teach them about work, about respect, and about boundaries. Many people think the sky belongs to the one sitting on the private jet. I don't. I believe the sky belongs to the person who dared to build the wings, and who knows when to let them go. Before going to sleep, I looked at Amy. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady. I thought about that rainy morning in Seattle, about a sentence that seemed small, but revealed everything. And I understood one simple truth. Never lock out the person who built the house for you, because when they quietly take the key back, you won't even have a place to stand in the rain. If my story made you pause for a moment to think about your own family, then it has done what it needed to do. It took me nearly a lifetime to learn this money can build assets, but only respect keeps a family together. Power can be handed over with a signature. Trust can only be kept through actions. And when trust is taken lightly, everything else becomes just a performance. If you think this story might help someone reflect on how they treat their parents or their children, please share it. And if you'd like to hear more stories about family, about choices, about small moments that can change an entire life, please subscribe to the channel. I'm not telling this to judge anyone. I'm telling it to remind myself, and maybe remind you, that the greatest legacy we leave behind is not what we own, but how we treat each other when no one is filming. Thank you for listening. Until the end.